Okay, so I'm going to again take my time with this. I've done videos, I've spoken about this numerous times, but I want to slow it down. I want to explain to you how white leftists and black civil rights leaders, and/or social justice leaders, not only incentivize the black struggle, they perpetuate it because they need it. Now, let me get this out the way. This does not mean that these ideas are exclusive to black or white folks. There very well will be other races that deal with a similar concept, and there, of course, are going to be, black and white folks that don't experience it or claim to. But I'm specifically talking about black civil rights leaders and/or social justice leaders and white leftists, and what I picked up. Okay, so some of this is going to be a harsh reality. I can't really say that enough, but anybody with a brain is at least mildly familiar with what has taken place with the historic struggle of black Americans. You have slavery, black codes, Jim Crow. It's no secret. I've long documented this. I've done entire articles on this, not only notating the struggles, but more importantly, getting the audiences to focus on the main culprit. It's not white people, it's not capitalism, it's the state. And the state has historically been utilized to oppress blacks, and these white folks who were oppressing the blacks would not have been able to initiate that conflict, and they irrefutably would have been virtually powerless in having it continue for as long as it did without the state. In short, the state has historically been used to implement aggression and oppression, endorse it, among blacks. Now, do some of these statist barriers still exist? Absolutely. But there is no disputing the fact that the large majority of those statist barriers have been removed or greatly reduced. Now, in America, compared to slavery era, blacks on general scale, meaning the exceptions are minor, slavery era blacks were far more oppressed than blacks are today. Excuse me. This is not a groundbreaking idea, nor is it bold to even admit that, but this is a fact. There are black billionaires, millionaires, and members of higher and middle classes, including politicians, that are black, and there is far more wealth and buying power among black people of today than black people of yesteryears. Now, what black civil rights and social justice leaders, as well as white leftists, have done is overemphasize the struggles that persist today and completely removed any sort of accountability and responsibility, but they've made it black identity. So they highlight unfortunate situations of individual blacks and generally lead you to believe there is no way that wound is self-inflicted. And even more so, to the unfortunate situations that a black victim was an innocent victim, they use those isolated events to paint the entire experience of black America. Why? Because it confirms the narrative that blacks are primarily victims who uniquely struggle. So, in being successful in convincing black people that this is to be the case, they've claimed that your identity as a black person is struggle and bottom feeding. And they've been successful because they've also convinced you of the opposite through your movements and your slogans. This is why there are so many people who take pride in being black, and they wear it like it's a trophy. But these black leaders and white leftists have incentivized your dependency. And all they've done is put themselves in positions of really power and really shifted themselves of any sort of blame. Their narratives don't even have to make sense, and they often don't. Now, through welfare statism, they've convinced blacks to support statism to the point that threatening to remove, that welfareism, that nanny state, means your own destruction. Even though the state, as I mentioned, has been historically used to oppress blacks, they've convinced blacks to cling to these words of equality, diversity, things like that. This has black people looking at human affairs where they see lack of black representation and seeing that as a problem. And because they've also convinced you that capitalism is bad, they see wealth as a fixed pie. So effectively, they end up trying to force their way onto white people's affairs and businesses instead of creating their own. This is the opposite of what pride is, by the way. Now, they've convinced you that because, whites have, something you are without. It's dependency. And that dependency is used to control and give power to those who advocate things antithetical to your progress. Civil rights leaders pop up. They pay lip service to these diversity and equality and social justice, which isn't even a thing, those efforts, and they gain power of big organizations as well as political power through the Democratic Party. And blacks are the ones who, the only really racial minority that votes 90+% for any political party. Ironically, they will campaign acting as if they are the savior of blacks. And you will not get a seat at the table. Every predominantly black city or district are nearly exclusively Democrat in representation from top to bottom. So where these complaints of poverty, police brutality really have been, they've been ran by Democrats for generations. And yet they really convinced you that Republicans are at fault because, they're racist. And even if the Republicans were racist, they don't run your areas and you don't vote for them anyway. So contrary to what it seems, white leftists and these black leaders need you to be convinced that you are virtually helpless and full of struggle and a constant victim. As long as these ideas, and as long as that's the case, really, you will look to them for help and for validation. If they run for office and acknowledge your struggle with false promises, you will vote for them. As long as that black artist appeals to that struggle, you will support his art. As long as the business owner appeals to your struggle, you buy their products. As long as that smug white leftist in entertainment self-hates and appeals to your struggle, you will support them. Their positions of power do not rely on convincing you that you are even relatively free or can put life in your own hands. Their power relies on convincing you that you are a peasant, a dependent peasant at that. It is not in their own best interest to even lead you to believe that you don't need them. Now, my solution has never been to support the other side, simply because they oppose another or support another side because they, oppose the other. Republicans are nothing but Democrats that are late to the party, for example. Instead, I choose to inform you of what I just did, getting you to realize that a lot of your economic mobility is in-house. You are not doomed for failure because you are black, nor should you feel that you have to think or act a certain way because you're black. You are an individual. And because of that, it is more productive to focus on what you immediately can control, which is often more than what you're led to believe. And if you do that, and you end up failing at some point due to your own actions, that alone is not insulting. That's how responsibility and accountability works. It's empowering, if anything. And it is far more easier to identify those who do wish to use aggression on the premise of race when you're not playing into the hands of dependency. Abolition of capitalism, or more so abolition of capitalism, that won't save the black man at all, as that is just the private ownership of goods and services and the free and voluntary exchange of those private goods and services. Capitalism will liberate the black man. I'd argue that one of the more evil things, some white people did was convince the black man that private ownership was something to be demonized. This stems from socialists convincing the black man that something like slavery was capitalism when slavery is antithetical. It's the opposite of capitalism because it's the forcible use of one person to serve the purposes of another. That is inherently anti-capitalism. You cannot own another person. Now, fights against anti-racism will not liberate the black man, as the white man's thoughts alone should not even be that important. As long as he doesn't use aggression, that has no effect on you. Him feeling some kind of way because you're black. Likewise, diversity movements will not liberate the black man. Diversity is nothing but a thing that is neither demonized worthy or admirable. If you truly believe that the white person does not want you in his affairs, create your own as opposed to trying to force your way onto his. If he does not want to sell to you, employ you, or acknowledge you, it is foolish and pathetic to beg him to take your money or labor. That does nothing but validate this idea that you need him, which puts him above you. Now, the white person presenting himself as an ally over emphasizing like anti-racism and diversity is a dangerous SOB, whose really his ideas are backed by the ideal that your world can't move unless white folks move it for you. So because an individual should not need someone else to validate him or her, it should go without saying that black folks do not need validation of other white folks. You know, they don't need validation from other white people. So I highly advise that you get to focusing on yourself as opposed to focusing on others' views of you. Stop putting a white man on his pedestal. Get on the offense. What is right and what is just is not dependent on what the white folks choose or choose not to support. They are not the beacon of hope, nor are they the measure of success. I cannot say that enough. But as it stands today in America, people seem to conflate blackness with struggle and lower classness. You know, it seems every black person, like on TV, for example, is fighting against racism or bigotry of a white person at some point. And then when black people succeed, people act as if they were not supposed to. They act like, you know, they're surprised if you're black and successful. Instead of merit, acknowledging your talent, your skill, your struggle, really is what hijacks the narrative. It's bigotry by way of low expectations. But for that social justice or black leader and civil rights champion or anything like that, or that white leftist, their position of power and popularity, like I said, is dependent on you being convinced that you are oppressed, even if you have the tools to rid yourself of that oppression.